So why is that seemingly even bigger than COVID?
Well, I think it is a technology that is almost inevitable and it's rolling out. But the problem is that the science has been so far suppressed, and even the bodies that are appointed to safeguard our futures, those bodies are saying that this is completely safe. Yet, very recently, I did the 5G Summit interview that Josh Del Sol did with me. I think I told you about that, Dip and Brad. You remember that? So this was a classified information by the Russian government that was actually initially published in 1977. It was only for governmental use, and it was marked that way. And the CIA declassified it in 2012. So it's actually been public information since 2012. But this is, we're looking at 43-year-old literature talking about the 5 millimeter 60 hertz frequency and the detrimental effects it has on the human system, actually not just the human system, on any living system, and it's been completely ignored. So looking at just some of the fundamental aspects of what this energetic system does, what this radio frequency electromagnetic fields do, and they have an impact on all living things, no matter whether it's 1G, 2G, 3G, I won't say beyond that. But regardless of what level it is, it's always had some type of an impact on physiology. But the most recent version of it creates some very noticeable metabolic changes. And these changes have an impact not only on the immune system, but also on the cell membrane integrity. So for example, one of the things that we see is that the voltage-gated calcium channels that are so critical for the ability of the cell membrane to regulate efflux and influx of calcium within the cell. When this voltage-gated calcium channels get disrupted, it allows for calcium to come into the cells, which then causes a suppression of apoptosis, which is concomitant with the use of the propagation of cancer. It's actually consistent and congruent with the oncogenic process. Now, what happens when you start to create this type of disruption? That's just one aspect of it. But then you have other aspects that go into play. And so these aspects, as they come together, it's not 1 + 1 = 2. It's actually 1 + 1 + 1 = 33 type of thing. It's a synergistic to an order of magnitude greater destructive nature. So you've got other aspects from this technology that cause lymphocyte subpopulation suppression. You have the hypoxic type injury components that people have been able to observe, which is secondary to the apparent disassociation of iron from the hemoglobin. So hemoglobin is the iron, oxygen carrying capacity of the blood. So when you pull the iron away from it, it actually causes a disruption. So the blood can't carry the same amount of oxygen. And the list just goes on and on. There's so many things that we don't even understand yet, how it affects the human system. Or whenever I say human system, it's actually affecting all living systems.
So these people that are rolling it out, like, what makes them immune? Like, aren't they going to be affected? Are they just naive?
I think that it's going to affect every living organism. I think that certain people are more sensitive, so they're going to be more susceptible to it. As far as the people that are rolling it out and thinking that it's not going to affect them versus do they have their own protective mechanisms in place, it could be either or, maybe a combination of both. It's definitely going to affect all life on the planet because you're talking about a radio frequency electromagnetic field that's going to envelop the entire planet, and it's a global microwave technology. Essentially, it's throwing off the entire magnetic grid of the Earth's essence.
And that's scary shit right there.
Yeah, exactly, because the Schumann frequency that the Earth resonates with, you can think of it as the pulse of the planet. It's being disrupted. And now you're talking about other implications. That
Huge.
That could be not just how it's going to affect life, but what it's going to do to weather patterns, what it's going to do to the morphological structure and the configuration of the planet itself. So, you're going to start seeing more natural disasters. You saw the footage that Jonathan shared with the sloughing off in Norway of 2,000 feet by 500 feet right into the ocean. You're going to start seeing all sorts of landslides like this. You're going to see earthquakes. There's been more earthquakes occurring. You're going to see all sorts of other natural disasters starting to increase because we're disrupting the Earth's magnetic grid.
Hello, everybody. Ace here, giving it to you straight with Conspiracy Realists. Today's show is a doozy. It's going to be a 2-part series on this threat of a quote-unquote second wave for the COVID-19 outbreak. Dr. Rashid Buttar drops bombs in this interview with so many juicy nuggets to explore. But the one that caught my attention the most was that 1977 declassified CIA document he was talking about on the 5mm 60 hertz radio frequency radiation, what we would refer to as 5G today, and the effects the Russians observed when testing it on mice. Brain fiber degradation, hemoglobin destruction, DNA RNA synthesis disruption, and so much more. Stick with me through this one. It's going to be deep, it's going to be intricate, but it's going to blow your mind. Let's dive right in. Now I really want to jump into this CIA declassified research on what 5G is now, but what they referred to as millimeter radio waves. And the declassified research is pretty long. It covers a couple of different topics. I want to know what happens when 5G, unabated, say, hits our bodies continuously. I want to see what the reactions are, physiologically speaking, neurologically speaking, and then I want to compare it to things that we're seeing today. This was translated by the CIA. They had gotten it from the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union had done this research on millimeter radio waves and basically organic life, like us and animals. And this study is on rats, and what came of it, it's pretty insane. I'm not going to lie. Okay, so let's just jump into it. This is from the Scientific Research Institute of Microbiology, Vaccines, in Sira Emine Minchkov. I'm not very good at speaking other languages, so bear with me. Morphological, functional, and biochemical studies conducted in humans and animals revealed that millimeter waves caused changes in the body manifested in structural alterations in the skin and internal organs, qualitative and quantitative changes of the blood and bone marrow composition, and changes of the conditioned reflex activity, tissue respiration, activity of enzymes participating in the process of tissue respiration, and nucleic metabolism. The degree of unfavorable effect of millimeter waves depended on the duration of the radiation and individual characteristics of the organism. Which basically is saying that this stuff really messes things up, especially if you have prolonged electromagnetic radiation coming at you, which is what the corona is. That corona radiation coming off of these 5G towers is exactly what radiation we're talking about here. Hopefully these COVEFI filters that Trump was hinting at a couple years ago being installed on all the 5G towers across the United States, which helps basically catch that coronal radiation coming off, and it hopefully won't poison us as much. But regardless, it's going to get out there. That's why it's so important for us to raise our vibration, to eat healthy, to drink lots of water, to try to reduce our stress as much as possible. I mean, the world isn't going to be perfect. It's not going to get any better in terms of electromagnetic frequencies, but we can. The ubiquitous propagation of radio waves, radio broadcasting, and television is contributing to the appearance of new physical factor, electromagnetic waves of the radio frequency range. This was in 1977, by the way. In recent years, it has been established that radio waves of different ranges have an unfavorable influence on the organism. The literature data from these people, that long-staying conditions of the effect of radio waves, the DM and CM ranges, leads to change of the functions of the nervous, cardiovascular, and other systems of the organism. With the development of characteristic complex of symptoms which permit speaking of a special nosological form of disease, radio wave disease. However, in the literature, there is almost no information about the biological effect of radio frequencies of the millimeter range, although the range is widely used in technology and the question of its biological activity has acquired special urgency. So we're talking about what Dr. Buttar was talking about, and that's the 5mm 60 hertz frequency. And this was also talking, remember he said that 5G towers can range between 30 to 300. And some people believe that 21.5 million Chinese in Wuhan lost their lives because of the 5G rollout that they hadn't even tested before. And Wuhan was their epicenter. And so all of a sudden, 21.5 million cell phones went offline in one day. And that was all we really got out of China. And everyone started speculating, obviously. We don't really know. And now that the floods have come, we won't even have a chance to really understand what happened in Wuhan on many different levels. The goal of the present investigations consisted in the study of the physiological and biochemical processes lying at the basis of the changes which occur in animals as a result of the effect of radio waves in the range of 5 to 8 millimeters at a density of the flow of power of 1 milliwatt per centimeter squared. The investigations were conducted on rates of the Y-star line and mice of the CBA line, irradiated for 15 minutes daily in the course of 60 days in the volume resonator of an experimental installation working on the basis of type OV12 generator. So basically, they created a scenario where they were able to take the radiation, a maintenance person that works regularly on generators, and turn that into something that they could apply to mice on their scale. And they did it over 60 days for 15 minutes. And this is basically what they figured out. So study of the morphological, which is basically taking a sample of the rat and putting it under a microscope and studying it. Study of the morphological, functional, and biochemical indicators which play an essential role in the formation of reactions of the organism. Disclosed various disorders in the experimental animals. As is known, the energy of millimeter waves, because of its weak penetrating ability, is absorbed primarily and mainly by the skin. Our investigations have shown that in the skin of irradiated animals, deformation of the receptor apparatus and well-expressed changes of a reactive character were observed, meaning shit happened. In the skin layer, properly speaking, appeared bunches of nerve fibers with hypertrophy of a portion of the fiber and sections with demyelinization. It is any condition that results in damage to the protective covering, the myelin sheath that surrounds nerve fibers in your brain, optic nerves, and spinal cord. When the myelin sheath is damaged, nerve impulses slow or even stop, causing neurological problems. We're starting off big. Oh my goodness. This is just insane. It gets so much worse, and we've been exposed to EMF in so many different ways for so long, and we've watched the degradation of our health specifically over the last 20, 30 years, and it's just all-encompassing. It's all of it, but this is just another element. In the dermis, among the collagen fibers, were small trunks of various thickness, the neuroconductors of which were fragmented in separate cases. A phenomenon of demyelinization were observed in the surface layers. They were seeing in these rats that this was happening. The nerve fibers in their brain and their optic nerves and their spinal cord were deteriorating. And that was just 15 minutes a day for 60 days. As the results of histomorphological analysis showed in the functionally active structures of tissue of the myocardium, liver, kidneys, and spleen disorders, of the hemodynamics, which is how the blood works in the body, were established with disruption of the permeable of the vascular membranes, the appearance of micronecrosis and subsequent tissue dystrophy. Micronecrosis is lesions. So lesions are starting to form on these organs right here, the myocardium, the liver, the kidneys, and the spleen, and a lot of the blood work that goes with them is being disrupted, and it's causing lesions to form and other tissue to basically waste away. Moreover, qualitative and quantitative shifts were revealed in the erythrocytic and leukocytic composition of the blood of irradiated animals, indicating suppression of the hemopoietic function of the bone marrow and lymphatic system. So the erythrocytic is a blood cell, and leukocytic is their big ridiculous name for white blood cells. Or the hemopoietic system consists of the bone marrow and the cells it produces, including leukocytes, erythrocytes, and thrombocytes. The highly proliferated nature of bone marrow makes it a target for toxicants that preferentially attack rapidly dividing cells. Thrombocytes are pieces of very large cells in the bone marrow, and they help form blood clots. So basically what's already happening in a very short amount of time in this review is this animal, this rat's brain is being affected. Its organs are being affected, and even the blood and the blood cells are being affected, because we are just giant electromagnetic fields. That's all we are. And our bodies are held together by that electromagnetic field. And so because we're porous and we're mostly space, these frequencies and waves, which is basically makes up the entire universe, goes through us, and it disrupts our natural mechanisms in our body, and it causes us to decay similarly to these rats. Noted in the composition of the red blood was eosinophilia, neutrophilia, and lymphopenia, and lowering of the hemoglobin level and reduction of the number of erythrocytes were observed, which was determined to a considerable degree by the retention of erythrocytes in the bone marrow. Eosinophils are a type of disease-fighting white blood cell. This condition most often indicates a parasitic infection, an allergic reaction, or cancer. You can have high levels of eosinophils in your blood or in tissues at the site of an infection or inflammation. Neutrophilia is an increase in circulating neutrophils above the expected in a healthy individual of the same age, sex, race, and physiological status. This represents an increase in a neutrophil count. Having a high percentage of neutrophils in your blood is called neutrophilia. This is a sign that your body has an infection. Neutrophilia can point to a number of underlying conditions and factors, including infection, most likely bacterial. And lymphocytopenia is an abnormally low number of lymphocytes, a type of white blood cell in the blood. Many disorders can decrease the number of lymphocytes in the blood, but viral infections, including AIDS and undernutrition, are the most common. People may have no symptoms, or they may have fever and other symptoms of an infection. I want you all to take note as I go through these all this evidence, and I want you to think about the symptoms I'm saying and how this is going to come into play to wrap up this section of the video. A blood sample is used to make the diagnosis of lymphocytopenia, but a sample of bone marrow or lymph node may be needed to determine the cause. Doctors can treat it, and some people are given gamma globulin and some benefit from stem cell transplantation. Lymphocytes are a type of white blood cell that plays several roles in the immune system, including protection against bacteria, viruses, fungi, and parasites. Lymphocytes usually constitute 20 to 40% of all white blood cells in the bloodstream. All three types, B lymphocytes, T lymphocytes, and natural killer cells, B, T, and NK cells. All three types have important functions in the immune system. Too few B cells can lead to a decrease in the number of plasma cells, which produce antibodies. Decreased antibody production can cause an increase in bacterial infections. People who have too few T cells or too few NK cells have problems controlling certain infections, especially viral, fungal, and parasitic. Causes. Various disorders and conditions, including infection with viruses such as the human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, the virus that causes AIDS, which is false, by the way, and I can show you evidence to that at another later date by the same guy who developed the COVID test, who happened to just die in 2019 randomly. Go figure. And the influenza virus can decrease the number of lymphocytes in the blood. So think about this. We're talking about 5G causing disruptions in a person's ability to fight off infections and viruses. During a pandemic about a virus that is all focused on avoiding this flu season. The number of lymphocytes can temporarily decrease during certain viral infections, fasting, times of severe physical stress, use of corticosteroids, and chemotherapy or radiation therapy for cancer. The number of lymphocytes can remain low for a long time when people have undernutrition, certain autoimmune diseases, certain chronic infections, and certain cancers. Symptoms are mild lymphocytopenia may cause no symptoms. Sometimes symptoms of the condition that caused lymphocytopenia may be present. Enlarged lymph nodes and enlarged spleen, cough, runny nose, and fever, small tonsils or lymph nodes, and painful swollen joints and a rash. All right, I'm going to jump back into this. In the latter occurred an increase of the number of erythroblastic cells and decrease of cells in a leukoblastic series. So basically, what erythroblastic cells are is a red blood cell before it becomes mature. So it saw an increase in immature blood cells and a decrease in white blood cell series. Under the effect of millimeter waves of low intensity, the degree of affection depends on the general condition of the organism and evidently is not so great as the observed disorders are in the main reversible. Which is saying, once the rats were no longer exposed to this millimeter radiation, these millimeter waves, the disorders that they were observed started to go away. They started to heal themselves with their own bodies. A characteristic feature of the biological effect of radio waves was changes of the state of various sections of the central and vegetative nervous systems, which involve directly or indirectly disorders of the principal functions. As a result of investigations conducted by us on animals irradiated with millimeter waves, disorders of conditioned reflex activity have been established. Weakening of the stimulatory process, reduction of the size of the latent period in response to different conditional stimuli, light, noise, or pain, and disinhibition of the differentiation reactions. Disorders of the stimulatory and inhibitory processes displayed in animals during the repeated effects of millimeter radio waves can be considered suppression of the function of the central nervous system, although the developed inhibition can be linked with protective compensatory reaction of the organism in response to irradiation. So what I believe is being said here is, as these rats were being irradiated with this millimeter waves, their reactions, their responses to stimuli became more indifferent, and they became more, docile, and you could kind of get them to do what you wanted. Sound beneficial to somebody who has nefarious thoughts, potentially. In the adrenal cortex, rats irradiated by millimeter waves, the ascorbic acid level dropped 3%. The functional changes established in the content of 17-OCS in the blood plasma and of the ascorbic acid in the adrenal cortex of irradiated animals indicate the influence of millimeter radio waves on the central components of the hypothalamus hypophysis system, the adrenal glands with involvement of a number of humoral components. So I want to show you guys what the hypothalamus and the hypophysis system is, the adrenal glands with involvement of a number of humoral components. So the hypothalamus is this part of the brain right in here, right? So it's right in here. And the hypothalamic hypophyseal portal system is the conduit that connects the brain to the anterior pituitary. The portal system is made up of two capillary beds, one in the medium eminence and the other in the anterior pituitary. Eminence, anterior pituitary. Abnormalities in the hypothalamic pituitary axis. Hypothalamic pituitary axis abnormalities in PTSD have been explored in numerous studies. Elevated CRH has been demonstrated in chronic PTSD, suggesting hyperactivity of hypothalamic stress response. Other studies have shown a decreased peripheral stress response, suggesting an adrenocortical insufficiency in PTSD, a finding which has been further supported by multiple studies showing increased glucocorticoid receptor binding in a peripheral mononuclear cells in combat PTSD and hypersuppression of cortisol in response to low-dose dexamethasone administration. These findings taken together suggest that patients with PTSD have increased feedback inhibition of cortisol released secondary to enhanced secretion of CRH. Basically talking about how the hypothalamic pituitary axis is basically where PTSD gets stuck in a person's brain, and this causes the cortisol, which is the stress hormone that Dr. Buttar was talking about. It causes the hypersuppression of cortisol, and it creates mayhem. And I'm someone who's suffered from PTSD, and I must say that confusion sometimes, overwhelm, those are some things that actually occur. And I'm seeing that in a lot of the way that some of these people who seem to have mental health issues kind of out there screaming and looting and burning things down. I mean, I'm thinking about the whole big picture of how are these people behaving. I mean, we judge them a lot. We keep saying they're crazy, but maybe there's something more going on than we don't know about. And that's why I like to do these deep dives, because I really enjoy understanding on a deep level what is actually happening. The hypothalamo-pituitary axis, the central regulator of the metabolism in invertebrates, also controls important physiological functions. Within the ventral diencephalon, the hypothalamus centralizes peripheral information and controls secretion from the 6 pituitary endocrine cell types. So now we're getting into the endocrine system, which is very important because where all your hormones are balanced. And so now you have a hypothalamus where cortisol, which is a hormone, it's your fight or flight response, it's being affected, but so is these other 6 pituitary endocrine cell types. And it's completely jacking things up in the body. The conducted investigation showed that in animals subjected to the effect of millimeter radio waves, there was a variation of the content and ratio of catecholamines. And catecholamines are hormones made by your adrenal glands, which are located on top of your kidneys. And a lot of people talk about, Western science has said that adrenal fatigue isn't real, that people can't drain their adrenals and get completely exhausted from stress, from just running around too much, from poor diet, from too much caffeine. And yet there's so many people running around with lethargy, with exhaustion. And here we're talking about 5G, we're talking about catecholamines, and they're hormones that are made by your adrenals that are located on your kidneys. And those examples are dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine, which is your adrenaline. Your adrenal glands sent catecholamines into your blood when you're physically or emotionally stressed. They help the body respond to stress or fright and prepare the body for fight or flight reactions. The adrenal glands make large amounts of catecholamines as a reaction to stress, and the main one is adrenaline. So now you have cortisol, which is responsible for your fight or flight response, and you have catecholamines that's responsible for your fight or flight reactions to prepare the body to get into fight or flight. They're both being affected. So do you see how when we were talking about those rats and they became a little indifferent and they kind of became docile, that's another side effect of this increased electromagnetic frequency radiation, is that we're actually slowing down. We're a lot less likely to stand up, a lot less likely to fight back. We become passive on top of all the other things that are causing us to become passive. In the blood, the concentration increased. In the hypothalamus, the adrenaline content increased and a noradrenaline level dropped. In the cerebral cortex, there was a slight redistribution of catecholamines. In the adrenal glands, the adrenaline content doubled and a noradrenaline level dropped by 11% in comparison with that in irradiated animals. The adrenaline concentration in the adrenal glands remained elevated by 60% 10 days after the irradiation ceased. The obtained results indicate well-expressed changes of metabolism of catecholamines under the influence of millimeter waves, both in the hormonal and in the sympathetic components of the sympathetic adrenal system, which the sympathetic adrenal system, the sympathetic nervous system, which is where PTSD it gets affected. And what happens is a memory gets stuck in the frontal cortex of the brain, and it can't be pushed into the long-term memory. It can't be pushed into the memory bank. And so people keep reliving it over and over again. So they're constantly in fight or flight because they're constantly reliving the worst moment of their lives physically. And also reflect changes of the functional activity of its hormonal and mediator components. The main mass of the energy in tissues and organs of animal organisms, as is known, is released during the biological oxidation of organic substances, in which case the greater part of it is accumulated in form of macroergs. What macroergs are is they help with the electrons in the cells. It's an important part that's going to lead us to the second part of this video, so I'm going to go deeper into that a little bit later. The processes of bioenergetics occurring mainly in the mitochondria with the direct participation of respiratory enzymes which accomplish the terminal stage of biological oxidation are of universal importance and assure that the functional activity of the organs and tissues, the synthesis of proteins and nucleic acids, the formation of some intermediate products of exchange. The conducted investigation showed that irradiation of animals by millimeter waves caused changes of the processes of oxidative phosphorylation in the liver, kidneys, heart, brain of the animals. The irradiation inhibited the oxygen consumption rate by the mitochondria of those organs in the active phosphorylating state and slowed down the rate of respiration upon exhaustion of the ATP. So what is phosphorylation and how does it work? Phosphorylation is the chemical addition of a phosphoryl group to an organic molecule. The removal of a phosphoryl group is called dephosphorylation. Both phosphorylation and dephosphorylation are carried out by enzymes. It's important in the fields of biochemistry and molecular biology because it's a key reaction in protein and enzyme function, sugar metabolism, and energy storage and release. Purposes of phosphorylation. Phosphorylation plays a critical regulatory role in cells. Its functions include important for glycolysis, used for protein-to-protein interaction, used in protein degradation, regulates enzyme inhibition, and maintains homeostasis by regulating energy requiring chemical reactions. So basically what it's doing is creating, it's maintaining, it's balancing the energy productions in our body. Types of phosphorylation. Many types of molecules can undergo phosphorylation and dephosphorylation. Three of the most important types of phosphorylation are glucose phosphorylation, protein phosphorylation, and oxidative phosphorylation. So glucose being energy, protein being muscle building, and oxidative being blood and air. Glucose and other sugars are often phosphorylated as the first step of their catabolism. For example, the first step of glycolysis of D-glucose is in conversion into D-glucose 6-phosphate. Glucose is a small molecule that readily permeates cells, and we use it for energy. It's quick energy. Protein phosphorylation occurs when the phosphoryl group is added to an amino acid. Usually the amino acid is serine, although phosphorylation also occurs on thioline and tyrosine and eucarylites and histidine and pachylytes. An important example of protein phosphorylation is the phosphorylation of histones and eucarylites. DNA is associated with histone proteins to form chromatin. Histone phosphorylation modifies the structure of chromatin and alters its protein and DNA-protein interactions. Usually, phosphorylation occurs when DNA is damaged, opening up space around broken DNA so that repair mechanisms can do their work. So basically what's going on is we're not talking about muscle, which amino acids are the building blocks of muscle. All proteins are long-chain amino acids. But we're talking about our DNA here. We're talking about phosphorylation, and protein phosphorylation is important for maintaining homeostasis in the DNA replication process in terms of DNA repair, which we'll get into in a little bit. Oxidative phosphorylation is how cell stores and releases chemical energy. In a eukaryotic cell, the reactions occur within the mitochondria. Oxidative phosphorylation consists of the reactions of the electron transport chain. In summary, redox reaction pass electrons from proteins and other molecules along the electron transport chain in the inner membrane of the mitochondria, releasing energy that is used to make adenosine triphosphate in chemiosmosis. But basically what it's saying is that what phosphorylation is responsible for is maintaining homeostasis in all of these different principles. In energy production of ATP, which is what our muscles use, right? So our muscles use oxygen and uses sugar to create energy, and this proteins, which is also creating muscle, which is also how we use our energy, to create balance in the DNA repair process, which we're going to get into more here now. In the liver and kidneys of irradiated animals, the intensity of phosphorylation decreased by 64%. The values of respiratory controls decreased by 26 and 28% respectively, and the changes were less expressed in the heart and brain. Everything that talks about maintaining homeostasis in the processes of creating energy, of fixing our DNA, and for regulating regulating ourselves is reduced by 64%. In the mitochondria of the livers of irradiated animals, the succinate dehydrogenase activity increased by 34%, and the cytochromoxidase activity decreased by 37%. Those data testified to destruction of the cytochrome chain. And so what happens when we have a reduction in this succinate dehydrogenase? What happens is inherited defects of the mitochondrial succinate dehydrogenase in humans are associated with striking variable clinical presentations ranging from early onset devastating encephalomyopathy to tumor susceptibility in adulthood or optic atrophy in the elderly. Although different genes encoding the 4 subunits of the SDH have been found mutated in association with these different phenotypes, we propose that the wide clinical spectrum actually originates from the specific roles of the SDH in the respiratory chain and the mitochondria, in particular, besides its function in the Krebs cycle and the respiratory chain. The specific redox properties of the enzyme could confer to the SDH a specific function in the superoxide handling. And so what I'm gathering from this is it reduces the cell's ability to move electrons around, which reduces the cell's ability to bring in oxygen, which increases the cell's ability to cause cancer later on in adulthood or have problems with eyes as we get older. Mitochondrial encephalomyopathy, lactic acidosis, and stroke-like episodes is a condition that affects many of the body's systems, particularly the brain and nervous system and muscles. Myopathy. Mitochondrial encephalomyopathy, lactic acidosis, and stroke-like episodes is a condition that affects many of the blood systems, particularly the brain and nervous system. The signs and symptoms of the disorder most often appear in childhood following a period of normal development, although they can begin at any age. Early symptoms may include muscle weakness and pain, recurrent headaches, loss of appetite, vomiting, and seizures. Most affected individuals experience stroke-like episodes beginning before age 40. These episodes often involve temporary muscle weakness on one side of the body, altered consciousness, vision abnormalities, seizures, and severe headaches resembling migraines. Repeated stroke-like episodes can progressively damage the brain, leading to vision loss, problems with movement, and a loss of intellectual function, dementia. This is just insane. So what's going on right now with this study is these millimeter waves are disrupting our cells' ability to replicate properly, our cells' ability to create energy for us to move forward, our cells' ability to repair ourselves, our DNA's ability to repair itself when it makes mistakes. It's complete chaos. The very essential in the system of enzymes of cell energy supply is the role of the ATP aces, regulating the processes of formation and the use of energy of the macroergs. They harness the energy released from the breakdown of the phosphate bond and utilize it to perform other cellular reactions. Investigation of the influence of millimeter waves on the state of nucleic exchange showed that in the liver, spleen, kidneys, lungs, and heart, there is a reduction of the content of nucleic acids and suppression of the rate of C-thymidine in DNA and C-uranine in RNA. In a comparison of the results of quantitative determination of nucleic acid, it was established that the rate of inclusion of the predecessor in RNA and its content in the organs changed less than the DNA. The change of the nucleic acid's concentration was more expressed in the liver, spleen, and kidneys than in the heart and lungs. Together with reduction of the nucleic acid's content, the quantity of acid-soluble products in the liver and spleen of irradiated animals increased by 35 and 43%, and the activity of ribonuclease and DNAs increased 50%. So what happens when C-thymidine gets disrupted? What does thymidine kinase do to begin with? Thymidine kinase have a key function in the synthesis of DNA and therefore in cell division, as they are part of the unique reaction chain to introduce thymidine into the DNA. Thymidine is present in the body fluids as a result of degradation of DNA from food and from dense cells. So when thymidine gets disrupted, it'll end up in the fluid of the body to demonstrate that there's degradation in the DNA from food and from dead cells. So, some key aspects about the proper way in which DNA sequences itself, fixes itself, and how this 5G technology can interrupt that. Basically, DNA proofing and repair. It's a mechanism to correct errors during DNA replication and to repair DNA damage over the cell's lifetime. Key points. Cells have a variety of mechanisms to prevent mutations or permanent changes in DNA sequence. During DNA synthesis, most DNA polymerases check their work, fixing the majority of mispaired bases in a process called proofreading. Immediately after DNA synthesis, any remaining mispaired bases can be detected and replaced in a process called mismatch pair. Immediately after DNA synthesis, any remaining mispaired bases can be detected and replaced in a process called mismatch pair. If DNA gets damaged, it can be repaired by various mechanisms, including chemical reversal, excision repair, and double-stranded break repair. Introduction. What does DNA have to do with cancer? Cancer occurs when cells divide in an uncontrollable way, ignoring normal stop signals and producing a tumor. This bad behavior is caused by accumulated mutations or permanent sequence changes in the cell's DNA. Replication errors and DNA damage are actually happening in the cells of our bodies all the time. In most cases, however, they don't cause cancer or even mutations. That's because they are usually detected and fixed by DNA proofreading and repair mechanisms. Or if the damage cannot be fixed, the cell will undergo programmed cell death, also called apoptosis, to avoid passing on the faulty DNA. Mutations happen and get passed on to daughter cells only when those mechanisms fail. Cancer, in turn, develops only when multiple mutations and division-related genes accumulate in the same cell. So, proofreading, which corrects errors during DNA replication, mismatch pair, which fixes mispaired bases right after DNA replication, and DNA damage repair pathways, which detect and correct damage throughout the cell cycle. And during proofreading, DNA polymerases are the enzymes that build DNA in cells. During DNA replication, copying, most DNA polymerases can check their own work with each base that they add. This process is called proofreading. If the polymerase detects that a wrong, incorrectly paired nucleotide has been added, it will remove and replace the nucleotide right away before continuing with the DNA synthesis. Polymerase adds an incorrect nucleotide to the new strand of DNA. Polymerase detects that bases are mispaired. Polymerases use 3,5 exonuclease activity to remove the incorrect nucleotide. Remember how they're talking about down here, they were talking about the interruption to the nucleotides, to the DNAs, the nucleic acids, and they were seeing the damage happening in the liver, spleen, kidneys, and the heart and lungs. So what happens when uridine, right here, right? What happens when uridine is disrupted? They propose that uridine suppresses fatty liver. So fatty liver being what someone gets when they drink too much alcohol, when they eat too much fatty food without enough fiber. The liver gets overwhelmed and can't process out all of the bad stuff out of your body. You start to poison yourself. Fatty liver by modulating the liver protein acetylation profile. Our findings reveal a novel link between uridine homeostasis, pyrimidine metabolism, and liver lipid metabolism. Nucleotides are building blocks of nucleic acids, RNA, and DNA. In addition to serving as information-carrying molecules, nucleotides and their derivatives also contribute to cellular signaling and energy metabolism. The best known and most studied examples are derivatives of purine nucleotides such as ATP, CAMP, and CGMP, and a bunch of other ones I'm not going to say. The balance between purine and pyrimidine nucleotides is critical for A, T, and GC base pairing in DNA synthesis. To maintain cellular homeostasis, it is plausible that derivatives of pyrimidine nucleotides also exert regulatory roles on cellular signaling and energy metabolism. However, the roles of pyrimidine nucleotide derivatives in cellular function are less clearly understood compared with purine nucleotide derivatives. Dietary nucleotides have been shown to exert protective effects on the immune and gastrointestinal systems, as well as on tissue energy metabolism, yet the underlying mechanisms are vaguely understood and nutritional values of dietary nucleotides have yet to be established. Uridine, a pyrimidine nucleoside containing uracil and ribose, has been shown to exert protective effects against drug-induced hepatotoxicity and psychiatric disorders. So what is hepatotoxicity? Hepatotoxicity implies chemical-driven liver damage. Drug-induced liver injury is a cause of acute and chronic liver disease. The liver plays a central role in transforming and clearing chemicals and is susceptible to the toxicity from these agents. So what is going on here is that the body's ability to push chemicals out of the system through the liver is disrupted, causing acute and chronic liver disease. And based on the fact that a lot of Americans and a lot of the Western world takes acid-based pharmaceuticals, when you increase the radio waves, the electromagnetic frequencies, and you start gyrating our cells, our DNA and our RNA, basically it creates chaos through everything. And all those drugs we're on to try to help us survive is going to end up being what takes us out, which is exactly what, in my opinion, they are looking for. Under the influence of radio waves, the protein spectrum of the blood serum changed. The albumin content decreased and a number of globulins increased, which led to decrease of the value of the albumin globulin coefficient, and the number of free amino acids decreased by 22%. An indicator of the reduced level of protein synthesis in the irradiated animals also was the established reduction of the rate of inclusion of 14C-methionine in proteins of the liver, spleen, lymph nodes, and thymus. The presented data testify to substantial changes in the protein metabolism, which occur under the influence of multiple irradiation of animals by millimeter radio waves. Evidently, the reduction of the general energy level occurring in the organism under the influence of millimeter radio waves had an effect on the formation of macroergs and caused a suppression of all functions of the organism, including suppression of synthetic processes, but specifically of nucleoprotein metabolism, which is very energy consuming. So what is albumin? Albumin keeps fluid from leaking out of blood vessels, nourishes tissues, and transports hormones, vitamins, drugs, and substances like calcium throughout the body. Globulins make up the remaining 40% of proteins in the blood. Wow. So now we're starting to see where the necrosis is going to come in. Now we're starting to see how the bone marrow is wasting away, how the blood is getting affected. Now, because of all of that, because of the blood's inability to do its job, now you're not getting the right amount of hormones, the right amount of vitamins, the right amount of drugs, the right amount of substances, minerals like calcium. Western people are mineral deficient like crazy. Even organic food. Even in organic food, you only get about 10% of the minerals that the food would have if it was grown in your backyard. This is just, it is absolutely insane. And so now we're on all these drugs. We're having these 5G towers. We have the water. We have the chemtrails. It's so crazy to think that where would we be if we weren't actually being poisoned all the time? So what does it mean if my albumin globulin ratio is high? A high AG ratio can be a sign of disease in your liver, kidney, or intestines. It's also linked to low thyroid activity and leukemia. If your doctor feels any of your levels are too high or low, you may need to have more precise blood or urine tests. So what do free-form amino acids, what are they? They don't need any digestion because they're the ones that we create in our bodies. We don't create complete proteins in our bodies. We don't create all of the amino acids. But free-form AAs, they don't need any digestion because we create them in our bodies. They are in essence pre-digested and ready to form all the enzymes needed for optimal food digestion and the development of proteins. When food is properly digested, the body will make all the substances it needs for excellent health. Boom. One of the big things I went through was my bioavailability was super low, and though I ate a lot and I ate a lot of good food, I just wasn't getting all of the nutrients that I needed. Once I balanced my micronutrients with a little bit of supplements, I cut out meat, I cut because of the nitrates, I cut out sugar and carbohydrates because they're poison for your brain. I cut out alcohol because it's pure poison. I was really able to get my body back. There was at one point I wasn't even able to really walk. And about a year later, I feel better than I ever have my entire life. This is very interesting. Very, very interesting. So diets that are deficient in the non-synthesizable amino acids lead to the breakdown of the protein structures in the body, such as muscle. Since skeletal muscle contains necessary proteins, the body will break down those proteins and take them in order to provide what is necessary for other protein functions. So basically what they're saying here is, as soon as the body's no longer able to produce the amino acids properly, it's going to start breaking down our muscle to get to those amino acids so that it can properly repair itself, so it can properly reproduce itself in our DNA and our RNA. So what is methionine? Methionine is a naturally occurring essential amino acid in humans. Methionine is an intermediate in the biosynthesis of several key amino acids in cysteine, carnitine, taurine, and phospholipids. L-methionine is transported into the cells via the L-type amino acid transporter. In tumors, the demand for L-methionine increases with increased protein and phospholipid synthesis. Methionine accumulates also in tissue with active inflammation and during tissue repair. The high L11C methionine uptake in salivary glands and nasal epithelium may hamper the tumor imaging, but that is a common problem with tracers that target increasing metabolism. Uridine also is a protector against hypoxia-induced lung injury. And the effect of the activation of the mitochondrial ATP-dependent potassium channel on the ultrastructure of rat lung in acute hypoxia, 7% of oxygen and nitrogen exposure 30 minutes, was studied. It was shown that uridine, a precursor of the mitoK ATP activator UDP, exerted a protective effect against hypoxic damage to the lung. The administration of uridine to animals prior to hypoxia decreased the number of mitochondria with altered ultrastructure and prevented the hypoxia-induced mitochondrial swelling. Uridine also protected the epithelial, interstitial, and endothelial layers of the air-blood barrier from the hypoxia-induced hyperhydration. The protective action of uridine against hypoxia-induced lung injury was eliminated by the selective blocker of mitoK ATP 5-hydroxydecanoate. This data suggests that one of the mechanisms of the positive effect of uridine is related to the activation of the mitoK ATP channel, which, according to the literature and our data, is evolved in the protection of tissues from hypoxia and leads to adaptation to it. A possible role of uridine in the maintenance of the mitochondrial structure upon hypoxia-induced lung injury and the optimization of oxygen supply of the organism is discussed. Okay, so what is hypoxia and hypoxemia? When your body doesn't have enough oxygen, you could get hypoxemia or hypoxia. These are dangerous conditions. Without oxygen, your brain, liver, and other organs can be damaged just minutes after symptoms start. Hypoxemia, low oxygen in your blood, can cause hypoxia, low oxygen in your tissues, when your blood doesn't carry enough oxygen to your tissues to meet your body's needs. The word hypoxia is sometimes used to describe both problems. Symptoms. Although they can vary from person to person, the most common hypoxia symptoms are changes in the color of your skin, ranging from blue to cherry red, confusion, cough, fast heart rate, rapid breathing, shortness of breath, slow heart rate, sweating, wheezing. The most important thing is to get more oxygen in your body. No shit. Thank you for that. Okay, so this whole deep dive in just one aspect of this whole 5G, masks, second wave craziness. So now this whole thing led us to hypoxia, which is low oxygen in your tissues. Hypoxemia is low oxygen in your blood. We talked about how the 5G, the radio millimeter frequencies, affect the blood's ability to not only carry oxygen, but to fight diseases. It also affects your DNA and RNA's ability to replicate itself, to fix itself, and it causes the body's inability to actually take vitamins and nutrients and minerals and important hormones properly to where it has to go. These are the symptoms. I just read them. I was really interested. What are the symptoms of COVID-19? COVID-19 affects different people in different ways. Infected people have a wide range of symptoms, from mild to severe. Symptoms may appear 2 to 14 days after exposure to the virus. People with these symptoms may have COVID-19, fever or chills, cough, shortness of breath or difficulty breathing, fatigue, muscle or body aches, headache, new loss of taste or smell, sore throat, congestion or runny nose, nausea or vomiting, and diarrhea. Look for emergency warning signs of COVID-19. If someone is showing any of these signs, seek emergency medical care immediately. Trouble breathing, persistent pain or pressure in the chest, new confusion, inability to wake or stay awake, and bluish or lips and face. Changes in the color of your skin, confusion, cough, shortness of breath, slow heart rate. Sounds pretty close to what it is we're talking about here. What hypoxia would cause? I started doing some research. And one of the things that came up was hypercapnia, which is when there's too much carbon dioxide in your bloodstream. And it's usually caused by hypoventilation, lung disease, or diminished consciousness. And it may also be caused by exposure to environments containing abnormally high concentrations of carbon dioxide or rebreathing exhaled carbon dioxide, aka wearing masks. So not only now do we have the 5G towers that are attacking us, but then you're putting us in these face masks and making us rebreathe our carbon dioxide, creating even more stress on our lungs and causing our bodies to not have enough oxygen in them, and therefore causing things such as hypercapnia. So what does hypercapnia have to do with COPD? You know how everyone keeps talking about these ventilators, right? Ventilators. COPD is a term for conditions that make it harder for you to breathe. Chronic bronchitis and emphysema are two common examples of COPD. COPD is often caused by smoking or breathing in harmful air in polluted environments. Over time, COPD causes the alveoli, air sacs in your lungs, to lose the ability to stretch as they take in oxygen. COPD can also destroy the walls between these air sacs. When this happens, your lungs can't take in oxygen effectively. COPD can also cause your trachea and the airways that lead to your alveoli, called bronchioles, to become inflamed. These parts may also produce a lot of extra mucus, making breathing even harder. The blocked and inflammation impede airflow in and out of the lungs. As a result, your body can't get rid of the CO2. This can cause CO2 to build up in your bloodstream. Not everyone with COPD will get hypercapnia, but as COPD progresses, you're more likely to have an imbalance of oxygen and CO2 in your body due to improper breathing. What else can cause hypercapnia? Hypercapnia can have many other causes besides COPD too. Sleep apnea prevents you from breathing properly while you sleep. This can keep you from getting oxygen in your blood. Being overweight or obese can also keep you from getting enough air due to the pressure put on your lungs by your weight. Activities that may limit you from breathing in fresh air, such as scuba diving or being on a ventilator during anesthesia, can also cause hypercapnia. Physical illness or events that cause your body to produce more CO2, such as having fever or eating a lot of carbs, can both increase the amount of CO2 in your bloodstream. Some underlying conditions can cause dead space in your body. This means that not all of the air you breathe in actually takes part in your breathing process. When this happens, it's usually because a part of your respiratory system isn't working properly. In many cases, this involves your lungs not doing their part in gas exchange. Gas exchange is the process by which oxygen enters your blood and CO2 leaves your body. Problems can be caused by conditions like pulmonary embolies and emphysema. Nerve and muscular conditions can also cause hypercapnia. In some conditions, the nerves and muscles that help you breathe may not work properly. These include Guillain-Barré syndrome, an immune system condition that weakens your nerves and muscles. This condition can affect your ability to get enough oxygen and can lead to too much CO2 in your bloodstream. Muscular dystrophies, or conditions that cause your muscles to weaken over time, can also make it hard to breathe and get enough oxygen. Can hypoxia lead to COPD? Conclusion. Alveolar hypoxia and consequent hypoxemia increase in prevalence as COPD severity increases. Chronic hypoxemia contributes to the development of adverse sequelae of COPD, such as pulmonary hypertension, secondary polycythemia, skeletal muscle dysfunction, and systemic inflammation. And what is the biggest cause of disease? Inflammation. This is insane. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease is a leading cause of death and disability internationally. Alveolar hypoxia and consequent hypoxemia increase in prevalence as disease severity increases. Ventilation perfusion mismatch resulting from progressive airflow limitation and emphysema is the key driver of this hypoxia, which may be exacerbated by sleep and exercise. Uncorrected chronic hypoxemia is associated with the development of adverse sequelae of COPD, including pulmonary hypertension, secondary polycythemia, systemic inflammation, and skeletal muscle dysfunction. A combination of these factors leads to diminished quality of life, reduced exercise tolerance, increased risk of cardiovascular morbidity, and greater risk of death. Concomitant sleep-disordered breathing may place a small but significant subset of COPD patients at increased risk of these complications. Long-term oxygen therapy has been shown to improve the pulmonary hemodynamics, reduce erythrocytosis, and improve survival in selected patients with severe hypoxemic respiratory failure. And it's the leading cause of global morbidity and disability. And it, by 2020 is predicted to become the third greatest cause of death worldwide. As pulmonary functions deteriorates, as the disease progresses, the risk of alveolar hypoxia and consequent hypoxemia increases. A mounting body of evidence suggests that hypoxemia is more than a signifier of advanced disease. Rather, it now seems clear that tissue hypoxia is a key player in many of the maladaptive processes and extrapulmonary comorbidities that characterize COPD. This is what they're trying to give us. They're trying to give us these lung issues so that we're stuck on oxygen, we're stuck on pills, we're stuck on the system, we're docile, we're sick and tired, it's crazy. So I was looking at, what else were they talking about? They were talking about how people turn blue, right? How you don't get enough oxygen to your tissues, and therefore your lips will turn blue, your hands will be really cold, you won't have good blood flow. It's called vegetavascular dystonia. If you easily turn pale or blush, you often experience dizziness, excessive sweating, very fast or very slow heartbeat, difficulties with breathing, sleep disturbances, your extremities become cold and numb, and you quickly get tired and feel squeezed like a lemon, then have no doubts you have vegetavascular dystonia. It has features of different ailments. These are psychological, neurological, as well as cardiac and vascular disorders. In the beginning, vegetavascular dystonia shows itself in the form of psychological disorders, extreme fatigue, psychological vulnerability, anxiety, and fear. They are followed by disorders of the heart, blood vessels, and the peripheral nervous system. The most common manifestations are disruptions of the heart function, cold hands and feet, excessive sweating, jumps in blood pressure, heaviness or pain in the head and temples, fainting. Sometimes one could have the so-called nerve redness. After a person was nervous, red spots appear on the face, neck, and chest. Usually it happens in women. Vegetavascular dystonia manifests itself externally not only on the skin, but also as a change in autonomic regulation of the eyes. Pupils suddenly become bigger and then smaller, as well as the degree of dryness or humidity of the mucous membranes. For example, if a person is worried, his mouth becomes dry. Sometimes because of nervousness, one can have fever. What is the reason? Usually, vegetavascular dystonia is not an independent disease, but a manifestation of internal diseases. Factors that predispose to the emergence of this disorder are individual personality and body traits, hormonal changes, transitional age, pregnancy, period of lactation, in addition to hormonal changes. It can be triggered by chronic stress, as well as serious illness, excessive exercise, severe emotional distress, alcohol abuse, and infection. Wow. In some people, vegetative dystonia is observed from birth. They are poorly tolerated by heat or cold. When they are excited, they turn red or pale. They are then covered. In children, vegetative dystonia may be manifested by incontinence of urine at night. In adults, more commonly in women, the regulatory functions of the autonomic nervous system may sometimes occur in the form of attacks. Vegetative crises. Vascular dystonia often occurs with nerve disorders, overstrain after acute and chronic infectious diseases, poisoning, vitamin deficiency, and nervous breakdowns. That's where we're at. They decided to conduct an experimental investigation that compared with observations of the state of health of 97 people that worked with generators that had these millimeter range of the basis of systematic conducting of biochemical analysis. The obtained data confirmed the existence of an influence of radio waves on the state of metabolic processes in the organisms. In particular, changes of the indicators of protein and carbohydrate metabolism were revealed, and disturbances of the indicators of immunobiological reactivity and the blood system were established. Thus, the conducted investigations indicate high biological activity and an unfavorable influence of millimeter radio waves on the organism. The expressness of the biological reactions increased with the increase of the period of irradiation and dependent on individual characteristics of the organism. Holy Christmas. So to basically wrap this entire long spiel up, I'm going to reread this synopsis right here. And it's going to fit perfectly with all the research we just did together. Morphological, functional, and biochemical studies conducted in humans and animals revealed that millimeter waves cause changes in the body, manifested in structural alterations in the skin and internal organs, qualitative and quantitative changes of the blood and bone marrow, composition and changes of the conditioned reflex activity, tissue respiration, activity of enzymes participating in the processes of tissue respiration and nucleic metabolism. The degree of unfavorable effect of millimeter waves depended on the duration of the radiation and individual characteristics of the organism. This was in 1977. And this was just talking about basically low-key radio and television waves. Think about how much electromagnetic frequency interference is today in just your hometown with these towers going up, with everything else, with Wi-Fi. We're giant balls of electrical energy. Our bodies need to be grounded on the earth in order to maintain homeostasis in all the systems. This stuff right here that we distract ourselves with, in reality, it's literally tearing us apart down to the molecules in our body. Call me a conspiracy theorist if you think that I'm crazy for being concerned about what's happening on our world. But if you can bear with a video like this and go through it, how could you possibly not question it now? And that's all we're trying to do here with this movement, is just get people to say, I never thought about it that way. Well, I want to really thank you all for sticking in here with me. It was a long one. It's only the first part. I'm going to go talk about masks and how they play into this effect with hypoxia, with hypoxemia, and how it plays in with this 5G to keep us sick, to keep us reliant on the system, to keep us spending all of our money trying to survive. I really appreciate you all. This is Ace with Conspiracy Realists, signing off.